Hey everyone, thank you for joining. We're just going to we started just 30 seconds early, so we're just going to give a little bit of time as people drift in um, to the webinar, and then we will get underway. Okay, as people are still joining, just mention that there's a chat feature in the webinar. So if you're in and you fancy introducing yourself, we'd love to hear from you, hear where you're from, who you are, where you're from. So you can pop that in the chat. That'd be lovely to get any interaction in there. Like I said, we'll just give another 30 seconds or so, and then we'll get underway. Okay, great. So we're on time now, so let's get started. So today we're going to be talking about interpreting SPC charts. This is the latest in our CoffeeTime QI series. So we've got just a short session today, 30 minutes, so a fair bit to pack in. But we will be going through a little bit of theory, and then we'll also go into live QI and have a look at an SPC chart and how you'd use it as part of your project. So before we get underway, just going to go through a little bit of housekeeping. So firstly, introductions. So my name's Andrew. I'm going to be hosting the webinar today, going to be talking you through this topic. I obviously one of the team here at LifeQI, been working with SPC charts for 7 or 8 years now. So probably by no means an expert, but I feel like I've got some knowledge that I can share, and hopefully it's going to be useful for you guys, and particularly in the practical application of that. I'm joined by my colleague, Erica. So Erica's going to be monitoring the chat and the Q&A. So if you have any questions, please use those two things. You can either pop stuff in the chat. Likewise, if you've got anything to say, just pop it in there. Questions, preferably in the Q&A, and then we can address those. In terms of addressing your questions, Erica will share things with you as we go through the session in terms of links that will be useful. And we'll also try to address any questions that come up. Hopefully we'll have a bit of time at the end of the session to answer your questions sort of on the webinar. But we'll see what time we've got left. Finally, the webinar is also being recorded. So if you do need to leave for whatever reason, or you want to watch it again, then you can do that. You will get an email probably within the sort of 24 hours after the webinar finishes, and you should get a recording of the session. So you can rewatch that. You can also share that with colleagues if you think that'd be useful for them. Okay, so let's get underway. First off, agenda for today. So we're looking at how to interpret SPC charts. And this is kind of the third in a series of the CoffeeTime QI webinars that we've been doing on measurement and charting. So there's 2 previous ones which you can see on the screen here. We've got our one from back in April, measurement for improvement. That was sort of the basics of measurement, what to measure, how to measure it. So that one's pretty useful. We've also got our introduction to improvement charts, where we looked at the charts in a bit more detail, and the differences between different types of chart and how you might use different control charts, for example. So yeah, feel free to go and watch those if you haven't seen those already. They're available via our website or on our YouTube channel. So if you go onto YouTube, search LifeQI, you'll find our channel and you can find those videos there. So this one kind of builds on them. We're not going to refer back to them too much. And obviously this will be useful independently as well. So in the session today, we're going to look at briefly look at why we use SPC in the first place. So run through that quickly so that we're all sort of clear on that. And then we're going to go into a little bit more detail on the types of variation you might see on your charts. So look at common cause versus special cause variation, look at some of the special cause rules, how to identify them. And then crucially, the next point is around what you actually do when you see those things, because how do we practically apply that to the work that we're undertaking. Then we're going to go into Life QI and actually look at an SPC chart, and I'll talk you through how you might use that through the course of your improvement work. And then finally, we'll just share a few resources at the end. Okay, so statistical process control. We've really got two types of chart that we're talking about when we talk about SPC charts. So those are identified here on the top right. So we've got our run charts, which are kind of like a simple type of SPC chart. It's widely applicable. You can use it on lots of different types of data, but it only identifies very basic statistical changes, like shifts, for example, in your data. So it's quite a basic application. We then have control charts, which are what people more commonly think about when they refer to SPC, and that is what we'll focus on today. So these are also referred to sometimes as Shewhart charts, after the person who sort of came up with the idea for these, Walter Shewhart, 100 years ago. He came up with sort of the premise behind these charts. So there's lots of different types of these. We went through this on the previous webinar, so we won't cover off all of that today. But they do provide a lot more kind of statistical and analytical capabilities. So a bit more kind of useful when you getting into the details. Okay, so why do we use SPC? So got 4 points here outlined on the left. The first one is they're really the best chart you can use when you're looking at data over time. The best chart you can use for getting sort of statistical rigor and analytical capabilities of that. So if you're using a run chart, you're going to get a basic version of that. But if you're using a line chart or a bar chart or a pie chart, something like that, you really get very, very limited ability to analyze your data. So I guess that's the main reason we use them, and the main application of them. In terms of how we apply that, so the first thing is these charts are used to monitor the performance of a process or a system, and also to be able to kind of react quickly when changes do happen, identify that quickly using the special cause rules and react to it. We also use the charts for identifying improvement, obviously. So that's what most of us are involved with doing. We want to see when we implement a PDSA or we test changes in some other way, like how is that impacting our data, and are we seeing real statistical changes in our data? So SPC can tell us that. And finally, we want to predict how the process will perform in future. So if you've got a process that's in control and not being changed, you should be able to predict within sort of bounding limits, which we call the upper control limit, the lower control limit, like where your data, how your system is going to perform within those limits, basically. So what is sort of accepted as normal. So really useful for that if you're just sort of monitoring a process as well. Okay, so next slide is thinking about the different types of variation that we see in SPC. So we've got two types of variation, one on each side of the slide here. So the first on the left, common cause variation. So this is pretty easy to explain. This is like the stable, predictable stuff. It's natural, random variation in your data and in your process, sort of as you're looking at it over time. So, for example, if you look at patient waiting times, like not every patient is going to wait for exactly the same amount of time, but as you go through that process, there's like a natural level of variability within there. And that would show that sort of process is largely in control and stable. So normally this type of variation doesn't reflect a specific cause or issue. It's not a negative thing. There's no specific action that's required to resolve anything. It's just the natural variation over time. So that might be, yeah, the example at the bottom here, like a month-to-month fluctuation or day-to-day or whatever it is, or minor changes due to like staffing on different shifts and things like that. So it's just sort of the natural stuff that happens in the background, essentially. So that's hopefully fairly easy to get your head around. We then have our special cause variation, which is where it gets a little bit more interesting. So here we've got things that are unstable and not predictable. So this is the unnatural stuff and stuff where we've got a real statistical change or statistical anomaly in our data. And this is usually caused by some specific event or identifiable factors. And often if you see these identified, then you need to do some investigation and possibly some corrective actions to resolve that. So this might be like sudden spikes in your data, significant increases or decreases, and such like. Okay, so we've got two types of variation. So we're going to focus on sort of the interesting type and the type we're talking about today, which is around special cause variation. So this is what you can identify on an SPC chart. So there's 8 rules of special cause variations. So these are like statistical rules that you can use to analyze your data. And there's 5 that are commonly used in improvement. And those are the 5 we're going to look at now. And they're slightly different definitions depending on who defines them, but the ones we're going to present are the ones that are used in Life QI and probably the most commonly used definitions of those. These are also called the Nelson rules, if you hear of that. Again, after the person who came up with these rules. So we're just going to work through each of these 5, and just spend a minute on each of them. So firstly, the first rule that we can use is the rule of the shift. So this is pretty easy to explain. If we're looking here for 8 consecutive points, either above or below the mean on our chart. So you can see the example on the right. We've borrowed a few examples here from one of our customers, East London Foundation Trust, because they presented these quite nicely. You can see here we've got a cluster of points here, which will lie below the mean on the chart. We've got a cluster of points over here, which lie above the mean. So yeah, you can see these. It's obviously looks a bit unusual on the chart. It's not a random variation. This is a really clear indicator that you've got a change in your system, and probably the outcome of this is you've got an improvement or a deterioration, and you possibly need to recalculate your mean and your control limits of your chart. So next up, we've got our second rule, and this is a trend. So again, these are fairly easy to spot on a chart. You can see the examples here where we've got a trend of increasing data points. You need to have 6 in a row in this case, and a trend here of decreasing data points. So these can occur anywhere on your chart, either side of the mean. It's just showing a gradual improvement or deterioration. And really, if you identify this on your chart, it's a pretty strong indicator that something is changing over time, either improving or deteriorating. Your system is not really stable. It's not in a steady state. So you can get that as like a leading indicator for a change, basically. So that's rule number 2. Number 3, this is the rule of the outlier. So this again is normally fairly easy to spot. You're basically looking for a single point which lies outside of your control limits. So on the chart, you can see here we've got our mean, which is our average on the center line. We've then got the upper control limit and the lower control limit. And we've got this data point in the red box, which is lying beyond our upper control limit. So it's, a real outlier in the data set, fairly obvious on the chart. And usually this is some sort of random event, some sort of event that can be traced to like a single cause. So there's not often in these situations, there is some sort of cause that you can identify and possibly resolve. So if we go back to our patient waiting time example, which we've referred to a few times, this might be like some event, like, I don't know, some equipment failure, which meant that patients at this time waited way longer than they should have done. So you could identify that. It's not necessarily something that's going to reoccur. That might be something that's just a single event that can be largely eliminated. Next up, we've got our rule number 4. So in Life QI, we call this the high variation rule. It's also called the 2 out of 3 rule, which is quite a useful way to remember it. It's basically explains what it is. So it's looking for any 3 data points lying in the final third of the control limits, basically. So I guess getting into a bit more detail on the chart, you can see our upper control limit, lower control limit, and then these are split into thirds by these dashed lines in between. So these are also called the sigma limits. So we're looking for 2 data points which lie in either the upper third, just below the upper control limit, or the lower third here, just above the lower control limit. So if you've got that, that's a pretty good indication that you've got some sort of instability in the process. Again, it's not something that is necessarily a new standard, but it is showing that something is unstable, and that's quite unusual to see in the data, and very much points to a special event. And then number 5, we've got our low variation. So this, I would say, don't see this one as much, just based on my experience of looking at data in Life QI. But this is where you have 15 consecutive data points, which all lie sort of around the mean, sort of hugging the mean. And basically it's between the first of the, below the first sigma here and above the first sigma down here. So it's all sort of data hugging the mean. It sort of seems like a good thing, like you're sticking everything into your mean, but actually it can be a bit of a indication of like maybe some sort of over control or overcompensation in the process. Or maybe it's a lack of sensitivity of what you're measuring. So if you're doing a lot of averaging, or you're doing, depending on your data collection, there might be biases in there and things like that, which can keep everything sort of looking very similar, and that's not necessarily natural. So yeah, can be a good thing if you're getting less variability over time, but equally can be a sign that something untoward is happening. So yeah, that's another one to look out for. All of these, obviously, like probably not going to remember all of these in detail today, but a lot of this, as you see when we go into Life QI in a minute, identifying these is really easy. The system will do a lot of that for you. So yeah, it's really just sort of having an understanding of what they are generally. Also, depending on what type of special cause you identify, you might want to do different things. So for example, with a shift, that's sort of showing a sustained change. So it might be time to recalculate like your mean, your center line. But with some of the others, like an outlier, that's just a single event that's probably you're going to resolve, or you're going to find out why that's happened. You're probably not going to adjust your whole data set based on that. So there's sort of different things you end up doing with these. Okay, so final slide before we go into Life QI is thinking about more of the practical application. So if you see some special cause variation on your chart, you've identified it, that's good. Obviously, as part of an improvement project, we're not just looking to do statistical analysis. We want to know what do we do with that information. So the first thing you normally need to do is go and investigate if there's a cause for that data. go and see why it happened. Then one way to think about it is you can classify that special cause. So is it something that's a good thing, so it's favourable, or is it something that's a bad thing? So if it's favourable, is there something in this improvement that we can standardise? So is there like a new process that we can put in place that sort of or spread that somewhere else, and so we can standardise that improvement? We also may want to look at recalculating control limits and the mean, the centre line. For example, if we had a shift, like that might be something you look at doing. If it's an undesirable result, we need to look at how to fix the root cause of that. So go and investigate that. We also might want to look at, beyond that, whether data needs to essentially be ignored. So we call that ghosting data. So it'd be with an outlier, for example. If you identify the root cause and eliminated it, you might then ghost that data point, so it doesn't influence the rest of the analysis of your data set. So that's worth consideration as well. And then finally, and really importantly, is to communicate this and document it. Whether that's adding annotations to your chart, which I'll show you in a moment, or it might be updating your PDSA documentation or standards. Then obviously you need to do that, make sure everyone's aware of what's happened, why it's happened, and such like. Okay, so swiftly moving on into Life QI. So hopefully you're all familiar with using Life QI in some way. So we're going to be looking here just at this SPC chart, which I created earlier. So we're looking at a C chart, and a C chart is basically a count of things. And in this case, we're going to be counting the number of monthly webinar attendees to our monthly webinars as part of our project. And you can see on the chart, I'll just point out very quickly, we've got a data table here. So we see we've got data going back to January 2023. It's monthly in occurrence and sort of runs up to March this year. And we've got the chart itself here. So a few things to point out. Firstly, we've got our center line, which is the mean. That's this dark line here. We've then got our upper control limit, lower control limit, like the examples we looked at earlier. If you're using Life QI, you come in and click on the data points, you can see exactly the values for those at that time. The y-axis here is the number of people in our webinars. The x-axis is the months. So I feel that's pretty straightforward. And then we've got phases of the chart. So we've got a baseline phase, which is kind of like setting your standard through the baseline. And then we've got a phase of testing over here, which we're going through. And you can see in the baseline phase, there's some natural variation here. So this is just that common cause variation, which is like stuff going up and down over time. That's just usual. But then what we're looking at as we get into the test phase, so we've implemented a plan, do, study, act cycle here. So at this point, February 2024, we reduced our webinar duration from 30 minutes from 45 minutes. We thought that might encourage more people to come. That might be a good thing. So we did that then, and then you can see following that point, we've got a number of things identified on the chart. We've got a shift identified up here. So here's that definition that we see again. We've also got period of high variation over this side. And we've also got this outlier, which is occurring related to this data point, which is way above our upper control limit in here. So in terms of using the chart and what you're sort of practically gonna do with this, so dealing with the outlier first, you can see that looks pretty unusual. You go and investigate why that occurred, and then find out a reason for it, and then you can add a note. So I've already added a note here, and my note says that we ran 3 webinars in September rather than usual 2. So obviously we're going to get more people in total. So that sort of explains that data point. You can largely then ignore that because it's sort of out of context with the rest of the data. So that's useful to sort of eliminate that. But then we also have a shift, which is generally showing a positive trend. We're getting more people on our webinars, and also shows a more sustained change over time. So this is sort of showing that we have an improvement and it's been sustained. So as part of this, we might then want to recalculate our control limits and our mean. So when you do want to do this, if you're using LifeQI, it's really, really simple to do that. So I'm just going to go into edit. There's no exact science on exactly when you should recalculate. There is a little bit of just thinking about, the appropriate time to do that. But I'm going to choose a point, say in like January 2025, and then I'm going to recalculate my control limits. Okay, I'm going to save that. It's quite updated, so I'm just going to give that a quick refresh. There we go. So you can now see our chart. We've got our test phase here. We've then got this jump up on the chart. So this is where we've done the recalculation. So we're sort of saying, like, this was our normal, our mean, and now it's up here. And then we're going to measure all our future data based on this. So yeah, really, really simple to do that. If just come in a few clicks of a button, you can do all of that, and then makes that really, really straightforward. So I want to add some more data. Let's do very quickly. Come and add the latest data from the last few months. April and May. For the chart, adds those in, so you can see we're now at a point where all of our data is now within our control limits. So it's sort of this is now normal in this case. And you might want to move your chart into sustaining phases beyond this, where you're just monitoring that everything stays basically within those control limits. Okay, so hopefully that's useful to see a bit of a practical application. Just going back to our slides quickly. Yeah, so yeah, we've been through how to interpret your SPC charts, or a bit practical how to use them. Few learning resources here. So Erica might have shared some of these links already. You'll also get the recording so you can access these. But basically our website, lifeqisystem.com. Check out our blog, loads of useful stuff in there. I've picked out a couple of specific articles related to this topic, which you might want to look at. So the more practical how-tos of like how to use the charts that I just showed, you can go to our help center, go and see the measures and charts section in there. Or if you want some help, just contact us at help@lifeqisystem.com. Finally, just gonna, before we do stop for questions or a quick question, I'm just gonna remind you of those other webinars before this. So if you want to go back and look at those, go and get those on demand. You can do that on our website. You can also register for future webinars as these come up, and you can also access a lot of this on our YouTube channel as well. So yeah, I think that's everything. I guess, Erica, do we have any questions, or have you been able to answer most of that in the Q&A?
Hi, Andrew. Thank you. That was a great session. There was one question which I thought might be helpful to answer live. So when you were in LifeQI on your chart, there was a September count, which was an outlier. And someone asked in the chat whether that would be a good example to kind of ghost delete that particular point itself. So I thought it might be worth answering that live on the call.
Yeah, so yeah, this point here, which is the outlier. So yeah, you could ghost that data point or remove that data point because it's sort of irrelevant. In this case, all I've done is identify that there's a cause for that, so that everyone else knows. But yeah, you could go about doing that. Just ignoring it. Thank you.
Perfect. And then one question that's just come in, is it possible to choose the chart type at the platform Oh, so is it possible to choose the chart type, or will the platform automatically decide the chart for you? So it might just be worth touching on that, and I will pop a link into the chat now.
Yeah, so there's a whole range of different charts you can use, and there's some really nice guidance on the best charts to use. What I'd probably recommend, you can either do it in the system when you set up your chart, but also the previous webinar in this series, which was the introduction to improvement charts, that had a whole section on how to choose the right chart. So I'd recommend going back and watching that again. It's half an hour. So yeah, I recommend that. Get it on a YouTube channel, and then yeah, get you well on your way, hopefully.
Perfect.
Okay.
And then just one more from Kimberly is, can we create these charts separately without the change idea or PDSA cycle in LifeQI?
Yes, you don't have to have those other elements. You can just go and set up a chart and start adding some data. Obviously, you could add those elements later if you wanted to, but yeah, no prerequisites to using those charts. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining. Hopefully that's useful. If you've got any feedback, contact us at help@lifeqisystem.com. Thanks for those of you who have given us your thoughts on what future webinar topics you might like to see covered. And yeah, we'll be updating the webinar page with future webinars. There's normally sort of 2 a month, and we will keep that updated. So go back there and check for updates as and when. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.